When HOA Karen snatched my 6-year-old daughter's inhaler during her asthma attack, watching her turn blue and gasp for air, she thought she was dealing with some powerless parent. She had no idea I was the county sheriff, and her cruelty just became a felony. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Grove Park as I pushed my 6-year-old daughter Emma on the swing. Her delighted giggles filled the air, a sound that never failed to warm my heart after the long, difficult days I'd been having at work. After 12 years as county sheriff, dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, these precious moments with my little girl were everything to me. They were the reason I came home every night, the reason I fought so hard to make our community safer. Higher, Daddy. Higher. Emma squealed, her curly brown hair dancing in the breeze like silk ribbons. Her cheeks were flushed pink with excitement, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with pure joy. Hold on tight, princess, I called back, giving her another gentle push. Her asthma had been acting up lately due to the changing season, but the fresh air seemed to be doing her good today. Dr. Chen had recommended more outdoor activities to help strengthen her lungs, and seeing Emma so happy made every effort worthwhile. The park was bustling with families enjoying the beautiful Saturday afternoon. Children's laughter echoed from the playground equipment, and the aroma of barbecue drifted from the picnic areas. This was exactly the kind of peaceful community life I'd worked so hard to protect throughout my career. That's when I saw her approaching like a storm cloud on the horizon. Margaret Whitfield, the self-appointed queen bee of our Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the stern expression etched into her perfectly made-up face, her designer heels clicking against the pavement with military precision. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features, and she carried herself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world revolved around her petty authority. "Mr. Davidson," she called out in that shrill voice that could cut glass and had become the soundtrack of my nightmares. "We need to talk." I slowed Emma's swing, my jaw tightening instinctively. Margaret had been a thorn in my side ever since we'd moved to the neighborhood 6 months ago, seeking a fresh start after my wife Sarah's death from cancer 2 years earlier. The grief had been overwhelming, and Emma and I had needed a new beginning, somewhere we could heal together. But Margaret had made that healing process infinitely more difficult. She'd already left 3 violation notices on my door. One for my grass being a 1/4 inch too long during the week I'd been working overtime on a child abduction case, another for leaving my garbage can out 15 minutes past pickup time when I'd been called to an emergency at 4 a.m., and the third for Emma's colorful chalk drawings on our own driveway. Each notice had felt like a personal attack on my grieving family, but I tried to keep the peace for Emma's sake. "Can't this wait, Margaret? I'm spending time with my daughter." Her eyes narrowed as she marched closer, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair not moving despite the breeze. She wore a white blazer that screamed expensive, paired with pearls that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Everything about her screamed entitlement and superiority. "Absolutely not. Your child has been using this park equipment inappropriately. The swings are for children under 5 only, and she's clearly too old." I felt my blood pressure rising, the same way it did when I dealt with particularly unreasonable criminals. "She's 6 years old, Margaret. And there's no age limit posted anywhere on this equipment." "Don't argue with me," she snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that made several other parents turn to look. "I've been the HOA president for 8 years and I know the rules better than anyone. Your daughter needs to get off that swing immediately." The other parents in the park were starting to stare, and I could see the mixture of sympathy and secondhand embarrassment on their faces. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about Margaret's reign of terror, but most people were too intimidated to stand up to her. She had a reputation for making life miserable for anyone who crossed her. Emma's laughter had stopped completely. I could see confusion and fear creeping into her bright blue eyes as she looked between Margaret and me, her small hands gripping the swing chains tighter. My protective instincts, honed by years of law enforcement and sharpened by single parenthood, kicked in immediately. "Lower your voice," I said quietly, but with the authority that had made hardened criminals think twice about challenging me. "You're scaring her. I'll speak however I want." Margaret shrieked, her face turning an unattractive shade of red that clashed with her expensive makeup. "This is a public park, and I have every right to enforce community standards." She stormed past me toward Emma, her heels clicking like gunshots on the pavement. "Little girl, get down from there right now." "No," Emma cried, clinging tighter to the swing chains. "I'm not doing anything wrong. Daddy said I could swing." The stress of the confrontation was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. Emma had always been sensitive to raised voices and conflict, a trait that had become more pronounced after losing her mother. The fear in her voice broke my heart and ignited a fury in my chest that I struggled to contain. "Margaret, step away from my daughter," I said, moving between them. But the confrontation was already triggering what I'd been dreading. Emma's breathing became labored, her small chest rising and falling rapidly in the telltale pattern that every parent of an asthmatic child learns to recognize with terror. Her face began to pale, losing the healthy pink flush she'd had moments before, and I could hear the first whispers of the wheeze that meant her airways were beginning to constrict. "Emma, honey, it's okay," I said, rushing to her side and speaking in the calm, soothing voice I'd perfected over years of managing her condition. "Just breathe slowly for Daddy. In through your nose, out through your mouth." But Margaret wasn't finished with her tirade. If anything, seeing Emma's distress seemed to fuel her anger rather than concern her. "Don't you ignore me," I said, "get her down from there. And don't think you can manipulate me with fake medical drama." "Ma'am, you need to step back," I said firmly, reaching for Emma's inhaler in my jacket pocket with practiced efficiency. "My daughter is having an asthma attack." Instead of showing any concern or backing away like any decent human being would, Margaret's face twisted with rage and something even more disturbing, a cruel satisfaction at having caused distress. "Oh please. You people always make excuses. She's probably just faking it to get attention and avoid following the rules." My hands trembled with fury, but I forced myself to focus on Emma. Years of emergency response training had taught me to compartmentalize, to handle the crisis first and deal with emotions later. Her wheezing was getting worse by the second, her lips starting to take on the bluish tint that terrified me more than any armed criminal I'd ever faced in my career. "Emma, sweetie, I need you to use your inhaler, okay?" I pulled out the small blue device that had become as essential as oxygen to our family. Just like we practiced. Slow and steady. That's when Margaret did the unthinkable. She lunged forward with surprising speed and snatched the inhaler from my hands. "These things are just crutches," she declared, holding it high above her head like some twisted trophy. "Children need to learn to breathe properly without relying on drugs. My generation never needed these things." Time seemed to slow down as the full horror of the situation hit me. Emma's breathing became more desperate, her small hands clutching her chest as she fought for air. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled, her eyes wide with the panic that every asthmatic knows, the terror of not being able to draw breath, of feeling like you're drowning in open air. "Give that back," I roared, my voice carrying across the entire park with the force of years of commanding authority. "My daughter can't breathe. She'll be fine once she stops this ridiculous act." Margaret backed away, still clutching the inhaler like some deranged collector hoarding a prize. "I'm not falling for this manipulation." Emma's condition was deteriorating rapidly before my eyes. Her lips were now distinctly blue, the color that every parent of an asthmatic child has nightmares about. She was making frightening gasping sounds, her small body working overtime to pull air into her constricted airways. Other parents had started to gather, their faces filled with horror at what they were witnessing. A young mother I recognized from the neighborhood covered her mouth in shock. "Oh my God, that little girl can't breathe." An elderly man stepped forward. "Ma'am, give the child her medicine." But Margaret was beyond reason, drunk on her perceived power. "Mind your own business. I know what's best for this community. Someone call 911. I shouted, scooping Emma into my arms. Her small body was shaking as she fought for each breath, and I could feel her heart racing against my chest like a trapped bird. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible between gasps. I can't breathe." The words hit me like a physical blow. This was my worst nightmare as a parent, watching my child suffer while being unable to help her. "I know, baby girl. Daddy's going to fix this." I turned to Margaret with a fury I'd never felt before, not even when facing the most violent criminals. "Give me that inhaler now, or I swear to God." "You swear to God what?" she interrupted, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You'll call the police? I know you work some menial job in town. You have no authority over me. I'm Margaret Whitfield. I own this neighborhood." That's when something inside me snapped. "You're right," I said, my voice deadly calm despite the chaos around us. "I should call the police." I pulled out my phone with one hand while supporting Emma with the other. Instead of dialing 911, I speed dialed my direct line to the sheriff's department. "Sheriff's department, this is Deputy Martinez. Carlos, this is Sheriff Davidson. I need backup at Maple Grove Park immediately." We have a medical emergency involving a minor and an adult interfering with medical treatment. Code 3 response. Margaret's face went white as the words registered. Her smugness evaporated in an instant, replaced by confusion and dawning fear. Yes, sir. Units are en route. 83 minutes. The gathering crowd gasped at the revelation. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. You're the sheriff? She stammered. That's right, I said, my voice carrying the full weight of my authority and years of experience dealing with people who thought they were above the law. And you just committed felony child endangerment, assault and interference with medical treatment in front of about 20 witnesses. Emma's breathing was becoming more critical by the second. Her small fingers clawed at her throat in the universal gesture of someone fighting for air, and her face was turning gray. I had seen enough medical emergencies to know we were running out of time. The inhaler, I demanded, extending my free hand while maintaining eye contact that had made grown men confess to crimes. Now. Margaret's hands shook as she finally realized the gravity of what she'd done. The inhaler trembled in her grip as she looked around at the crowd of angry faces surrounding her. I didn't know. My daughter is dying. I bellowed, causing her to jump and several children in the distance to start crying. Give me the inhaler or I'll add negligent homicide to your charges. She dropped the inhaler as if it had suddenly caught fire, and I caught it midair with the reflexes that had served me well in countless dangerous situations. With practiced efficiency born of too many emergency room visits, I helped Emma use it, coaching her through each breath with the patience and skill I'd developed over years of managing her condition. Slow and steady, princess. In through your nose, out through your mouth. There you go. That's my brave girl. The sirens were getting closer, their wailing cutting through the afternoon air like a promise of justice. Emma's color was slowly returning, but she was exhausted from the ordeal. Tears continued to stream down her face as she clung to me, her small body still trembling from the trauma and the lingering effects of the attack. Daddy, I was so scared, she whispered against my neck. I know, baby. But you're safe now. Daddy's got you, and nobody is ever going to hurt you like that again. 3 police cruisers and an ambulance screamed into the parking lot with lights flashing and sirens blaring. My deputies jumped out, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons when they saw the crowd and the expression on my face. These were good officers who'd worked with me for years, and they knew that if I was calling for backup, the situation was serious. Sir, what's the situation? Deputy Martinez asked, his experienced eyes quickly taking in Emma's condition and Margaret's pale, shaken appearance. This woman, I pointed at Margaret, physically took my daughter's inhaler during an asthma attack and refused to return it even as she watched my child struggle to breathe. She endangered the life of a child and committed assault in front of multiple witnesses. Margaret finally found her voice, but it came out as a pathetic squeak. This is all a misunderstanding. I'm Margaret Whitfield, HOA president. I was just trying to maintain order in the park. Ma'am, you need to remain silent, Martinez said, pulling out his handcuffs with the professional efficiency I'd trained into all my officers. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The paramedics rushed over to check Emma's vitals, their medical bags already open and equipment ready. She was stable but still shaken, her small body exhausted from fighting for air. One of them, a kind woman named Sarah who'd treated Emma before during previous attacks, smiled reassuringly. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Better now, Emma said quietly, her voice still hoarse from the struggle. The mean lady took my inhaler and I couldn't breathe. Sarah's expression hardened as she looked at Margaret, now being handcuffed by Deputy Martinez. Taking an inhaler from a child during an asthma attack could have killed her. This little girl could have died. Margaret's face crumpled as the full weight of her actions hit her. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I was just trying to enforce the rules. Your rules don't supersede my daughter's right to live, I said coldly. The crowd had grown larger with people recording everything on their phones. I could already imagine the headlines, HOA president arrested for endangering child's life. The video footage would be all over social media within hours, and Margaret's reign of terror would finally be exposed to the world. Sheriff Davidson, Martinez said, we need to take her statement at the station. Multiple witnesses have already given us their accounts, and several people have video footage of the incident. As they led Margaret away in handcuffs, she kept looking back at me with desperate eyes, finally understanding that her perceived power meant nothing in the face of real authority and justice. Please, Sheriff Davidson. I made a mistake. I have a reputation to maintain. I'm up for re-election as HOA president. I didn't respond. My only concern was Emma, who was now breathing normally but still clinging to me like her life depended on it. The paramedics wanted to take her to the hospital for observation, but her vitals were stable and she begged to go home. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice still carrying the tremor of fear, "why did she hate me so much?" My heart shattered into a million pieces. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that some people are so consumed with power and control that they lose their humanity? How do you make sense of an adult who would endanger a child's life over a playground swing? "She doesn't hate you, princess. She's just a very sick person who forgot how to be kind. But you don't need to worry about her anymore." Dr. Emily Chin, our family pediatrician, arrived within minutes of getting my call. She'd been treating Emma's asthma since she was 3 years old, and her presence always calmed both of us. Dr. Chin had been our rock through so many difficult times, especially after Sarah's death when I was struggling to manage Emma's condition alone. "Let me take a look at our brave girl," she said gently, kneeling down to Emma's level. After a thorough examination, she confirmed that Emma was stable but recommended keeping her home from school for a day or two to recover from the trauma. As we were preparing to leave, Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who'd witnessed everything, approached us with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Sheriff Davidson," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that what you did today was beautiful. The way you protected your daughter, the way you stayed calm under pressure. You're a good father and a good man." Her words meant more to me than any commendation I'd ever received in my career. Over the next few hours, my phone didn't stop ringing. The local news stations wanted interviews, the district attorney's office was preparing charges, and the HOA board was in complete crisis mode. Social media was exploding with outrage over the incident, and hashtag Justice for Emma was trending locally within hours. But all I cared about was Emma. We spent the evening cuddled on the couch, watching her favorite Disney movies and eating ice cream. She seemed to be processing the day's events in her own way, asking questions and gradually returning to her normal cheerful self. "Daddy," she said during a quiet moment between movies, "are you really the sheriff?" I chuckled, realizing that in our quiet home life, I rarely talked about work. "Yes, princess. I thought you knew that. I knew you were a police officer, but I didn't know you were the boss of all the police officers." "That's right. It's my job to protect people and make sure the bad guys can't hurt anyone." She was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with those big blue eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Did you protect me today?" "I'll always protect you, Emma. Always." 2 days later, I received a call from the HOA board. They wanted to meet with me privately to discuss the situation. I agreed, but only if the meeting was recorded and my attorney was present. I'd learned long ago never to trust people in positions of power who'd been caught abusing that power. The emergency board meeting was held in the community center, with all 5 remaining board members looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret's chair sat empty, a stark reminder of what had happened. The atmosphere was tense, with the board members clearly uncomfortable under my steady gaze. "Sheriff Davidson," began Robert Chin, the vice president, "we want to express our deepest apologies for Mrs. Whitfield's actions. What she did was inexcusable and does not represent the values of our community." "That's a start," I said evenly, my arms crossed. "We voted unanimously to remove her from her position as president, effective immediately. We're also implementing new training for all board members on emergency procedures and child safety." "And the violations she issued against my family?" "All rescinded, of course. We're also prepared to offer a formal written apology and cover any medical expenses related to Emma's treatment." I leaned back in my chair, studying each of them carefully. "What about the other family she's been harassing? The elderly man she fined for having too many flowers in his garden? The young mother she cited for her toddler's sidewalk chalk art? The veteran she reported for having an American flag that was supposedly the wrong size?" The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They knew I was right. Margaret's abuse had been systematic and widespread. "We'll be reviewing all of Mrs. Whitfield's recent actions and making appropriate adjustments." "See that you do. And I want it on record that any future harassment of families in this neighborhood will result in criminal charges being filed. The HOA is not above the law." The trial preparation began immediately. District Attorney Jessica Walsh, a fierce prosecutor I'd worked with many times, was personally handling the case. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular passion for protecting children. "Sheriff Davidson," she said during our first meeting, "this case is going to make headlines. Are you prepared for the media attention?" My only concern is justice for my daughter and protecting other children from people like Margaret Whitfield. Good. Because I intend to prosecute this to the fullest extent of the law. Margaret's trial began 3 months later. The local news coverage was extensive, and the courtroom was packed every day with reporters, concerned parents and community members who'd been victimized by Margaret's abuse of power. Emma didn't have to testify, the video evidence from the park was clear enough, and dozens of witnesses came forward to describe the incident and Margaret's pattern of harassment. The prosecution's case was devastating. Video after video showed Margaret snatching the inhaler, refusing to return it, and dismissing Emma's obvious medical distress. Character witnesses described years of harassment and abuse of power. Medical experts testified about the life-threatening nature of Margaret's actions. During the trial, more stories emerged about Margaret's reign of terror. The elderly veteran she'd harassed for his flag testified with dignity about how she'd made his life miserable. The young mother with the toddler broke down in tears describing how Margaret had threatened to have her children removed from the home over chalk drawings. Family after family came forward with stories of harassment, intimidation, and abuse. The defense tried desperately to portray Margaret as a dedicated community volunteer who'd made a terrible mistake in judgment. Her lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Richard Blackstone, argued that she'd been trying to maintain community standards and had panicked when the situation escalated. But the prosecutor, Jessica Walsh, wasn't having it. This wasn't a mistake, she argued in her closing statement. This was a deliberate choice to prioritize power and control over the life of a child. Mrs. Whitfield saw a 6-year-old girl struggling to breathe and chose to make it worse. She heard a father begging for his daughter's medication and chose to refuse. She could have killed Emma Davidson. The judge, an elderly man named Harold Morrison who'd presided over family court for 20 years, was clearly moved by the case. During sentencing, his voice carried the weight of decades of seeing adults fail children. Mrs. Whitfield, he said looking directly at her, in my 2 decades on this bench, I've seen many cases of adults failing children. But I've rarely seen such a callous disregard for a child's life. You took a medical device away from a sick child and refused to return it even as she struggled to breathe. Your actions were not just criminal, they were unconscionable. Margaret received 18 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay Emma's medical expenses, attend anger management classes, and perform 500 hours of community service at the children's hospital. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order preventing her from having any contact with Emma or our family. As we left the courthouse that day, Emma slipped her small hand into mine. Daddy, do you think she learned her lesson? I squeezed her hand gently. I hope so, Princess. But more importantly, everyone else learned that no one gets to hurt little girls on Daddy's watch. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected changes to our community. The HOA was completely restructured, with new leadership and policies focused on community building rather than enforcement. Property values actually increased as the neighborhood became known for its family-friendly atmosphere rather than its oppressive HOA. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. It was Robert Chin, the new HOA president, accompanied by several other board members. Sheriff Davidson, we wanted to update you on some changes we've made, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I'm listening. We've completely restructured how the HOA operates. We've implemented a grievance process, established clear guidelines for interactions with residents, and created a children's safety committee. We've also set up a scholarship fund in Emma's name for children with medical conditions. I was impressed despite myself. That's good to hear. We want to do more though. The board has voted to invite you to serve as our community safety advisor. It would be a volunteer position, but we'd value your input on policies and procedures. I considered the offer carefully. I'll need to think about it, but I appreciate the gesture. That evening, I discussed it with Emma over dinner. What do you think, Princess? Should Daddy help make the neighborhood safer for all the kids? She thought about it seriously, her face scrunched up in concentration the way it always did when she was considering something important. Will it help other kids like me? It might. Then you should do it, Daddy. You're good at protecting people. A year later, our neighborhood had transformed completely. The new HOA board focused on community building rather than punishment. They organized family fun days, started a community garden, and established an emergency response team trained in basic first aid and CPR. The atmosphere was completely different. Instead of fear and resentment, there was genuine community spirit. Emma, now 7 and thriving, had become something of a local celebrity. Her story had inspired legislation at the state level requiring HOA board members to receive training on emergency procedures and children's rights. The Emma's Law legislation was signed by the governor 6 months after the trial, ensuring that no other child would suffer what Emma had endured. But more importantly, she was happy and healthy. Her asthma was well controlled with a new treatment plan, and she'd made friends throughout the neighborhood. She was especially close to Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd become like a grandmother to her and often watched her when I had to work late. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, but it eventually died down. Emma handled it with remarkable grace for such a young child, always focusing on how the experience had made the neighborhood safer for other children. One evening, as we walked through the park where everything had happened, Emma stopped at the swing set. There was now a small plaque installed by the new HOA board that read, "In memory of all children who deserve to play safely. Dedicated to Emma Davidson and her courage. Daddy, can I swing here again?" "Of course, Princess. This is your park too." As she swung back and forth, laughing in the golden evening light, I reflected on how much our lives had changed. That terrifying day when Margaret endangered my daughter's life had led to positive changes for our entire community. Sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Emma's laughter brought me back to the present. She was calling for me to push her higher just like she had that day a year ago. But this time there was no fear, no threat, no Karen waiting to pounce. There were just other families enjoying the park, children playing safely, and a community that had learned the importance of protecting its most vulnerable members. "Higher, Daddy. I want to touch the clouds." "Hold on tight, Princess," I said, giving her a gentle push. "We'll reach those clouds together." As the sun set over Maple Grove Park, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I made a silent promise to my daughter and to every child in our community. No one would ever threaten their safety or happiness on my watch. Never again. The little girl who'd nearly lost her life to one woman's cruelty had become the catalyst for change that protected countless other children. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful justice of all. Emma's voice carried across the park as she swung higher and higher. "Look at me, Daddy. I'm flying." "Yes, Princess. You're flying and nothing will ever bring you down again." Margaret Whitfield served her full sentence and was released after 18 months. She moved to another state, her reputation and career in ruins. The incident had been covered nationally, and her name had become synonymous with HOA abuse of power. She never contacted our family again. But Emma's story lived on, inspiring communities across the country to reform their HOA policies and prioritize children's safety. My brave little girl had not only survived her ordeal but had used it to make the world a safer place for other children. And every evening, as we walked through our transformed neighborhood, I was reminded that sometimes the greatest victories come from our greatest challenges. Emma had taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up to bullies, protecting the innocent, and never backing down when it comes to family. She was and always would be my greatest pride and my most important job. Being county sheriff was what I did, but being Emma's father was who I was. The swing set where it all began now bore a small sign, "All children welcome to play safely here." It was a simple message, but it represented a profound change in our community's values. As Emma grew older, she would sometimes ask about that day and I would tell her the truth, that sometimes bad things happen to good people, but that's when good people must stand up and fight back. She learned early that authority comes with responsibility, that power should be used to protect rather than harm, and that every child deserves to feel safe in their own neighborhood. The neighborhood that had once lived in fear of Margaret Whitfield's arbitrary rules now thrived under leadership that prioritized community over control. Children played freely in the parks, families gathered for block parties, and neighbors looked out for each other rather than looking for violations to report. Emma's courage had transformed not just our neighborhood, but countless others across the country. Her story became a symbol of standing up to bullies and protecting children, inspiring new laws and policies that prevented HOA abuse. And every time I pushed her on that swing, I was reminded that the most important battles aren't fought in courtrooms or county offices. They're fought by parents protecting their children, by communities standing together, and by little girls who refuse to let bullies win. Emma Davidson, my daughter, my hero, my reason for fighting every day to make the world a safer place for children. Her laughter echoing across Maple Grove Park was the sound of victory, the sound of a community healed, and the sound of a future where no child would ever again have their lifeline taken away by someone drunk on petty power. The swing that had once been the site of terror was now a symbol of triumph. Emma's story would be told for generations, not as a tale of victimization, but as a story of courage, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter. In the end, Margaret Whitfield had wanted to control a playground. Instead, she had unleashed a force that would protect playgrounds everywhere. Emma's courage had created a legacy that would keep children safe long after she'd outgrown the swings. And that was the most beautiful justice of all.